A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Rob Norman is the ACL State Director for Queensland. Hey Rob, a special welcome back to 2020.
Always good to join you, Neil.
Hey Rob, let's start with a recent US inquiry into abortion pills found 1 in 10 women in the study had serious side effects. Now you're in Queensland, and listeners will be aware there's a gag on talking about anything to do with abortion in our government. What does this all mean?
Yeah, this study, Neil, really highlights the problem with gagging democracy. This is such an important issue, and as you've rightly said, it affects 1 in 10 women as identified in the study. And this was a big study. We're not talking about small numbers. So there were 865,000 plus women who were basically, the data was checked, and what they found was that women were experiencing very serious issues. 1 in 10, or 10.93% of women, experienced sepsis, infection, hemorrhaging, and other really serious adverse effects within 45 days of administering the chemical abortion. So the problem with our gag order, obviously, is that once we introduce an order like that, this issue, it's very hard to address in the Parliament. And it'll take some gymnastics to actually raise that one in the Parliament. So we're really encouraging our supporters, particularly in Queensland, to jump on our website and check out the emailing tool there that allows you to email the Premier and ask him to lift that gag order.
Nobody seems to appreciate that a gag order like this, as you say, it gags democracy, but the gag disadvantages these vulnerable women. So when you report like this comes out, 1 in 10, that's a lot of women, serious side effects, and the state government in Queensland can't talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is it's what they call a negative consequence of the gag order. Now, we know that from experience, whenever a new bill is introduced that is a bad bill, it always carries negative consequences. So this gag order is a bad order because it's carried a consequence. The consequence is that now we have problems addressing the problem, and the problem is presenting itself very clearly through this study.
And Rob, just to cut to the chase here, traditional ways of doing abortions, those are slowly moving to the wayside while these chemical abortions are taking over. No less brutal, in fact, I've often said, even on this program now over many years, when we're talking about these chemical abortions, we're talking about human pesticide here. And babies' lives are being lost, but women are the ones who are suffering in all of this. But there's this major shift, isn't there? While we used to talk about abortion clinics, now we're just sending out people these tablets in the mail. This is a big change, and somehow or other the adjustment has to be there, and a government that can't talk about it, well, that just sounds crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the study in the US is calling on the FDA to actually ban these pills. There's such a bad backlash on it. We're nowhere near that. And as you say, telehealth allows a lady to jump on the phone, to talk to her doctor, to then subsequently receive the pills in the mail. To take the pills, they can be in a remote area. We know that in New South Wales and Queensland, those pills can be administered by nurses. And then the women suffer in silence, basically. And if they're in a remote place, they're in imminent danger of hemorrhaging, which is a life-threatening episode, of course. So not only is the baby obviously a victim of this, but the women are as well. It's just, there's no winners, Neil. It's a shocking situation. And then you've got the whole babies born alive issue, of course, that is associated very closely with chemical abortions.
Okay, there's lots more to say on that. There's a bunch of issues that you are up against in your state of Queensland. The Queensland government's ordered an inquiry into elder abuse. What's happening with this elder abuse inquiry?
Yeah, this is an inquiry, Neil, where there's been public hearings around the state for the last 12 months, and the government rightly has recognised that older Queenslanders are vulnerable to all kinds of abuse. And so we've placed a submission to the inquiry. We've made a written submission, and we've highlighted the vulnerability of older Queenslanders, particularly in face of suicide laws, voluntary suicide or assisted suicide. The government calls it voluntary assisted dying. We think that that's a sanitised term, and so we choose to call it assisted suicide. But there are significant dangers and coercive pressures that come with this. It doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to work that out, Neil. And so older people are vulnerable with families, with their estate planning and so forth. They're vulnerable to the suggestion that they're a burden on their family. So our submission has focused on these very serious issues that really cause all sorts of familial pressures, financial motivations, emotional manipulation, and even neglect. These are all issues that older people face, and they have a direct effect on the so-called voluntary assisted dying laws.
You know, these VAD laws, voluntary assisted dying, there's an assumption, isn't there? And I think governments take us for fools because they assume that everybody is nice and will do the right thing. And, the reality is not everybody does love their ageing mum and dad. And the coercion that you mentioned and inheritance impatience, these are putting the elderly of our nation very much at risk. And the government seems to be cheering from the sidelines as people want to be coercive and do away with mum and dad. I mean, am I being too negative on this? What are your thoughts?
No, look, I mean, that's obviously true. I think that is true. That doesn't even take into account, Neil, that there are activists in every area of life. And if you look at the medical profession, they are no exception. So there are activist doctors, there are activist nurses, there are people that can whisper into the ear of elderly people and say, you know what, this would be a whole lot easier on your family if you weren't here. And so that kind of coercion needs to be addressed. And again, this is a bad law. So when Queensland and other states have introduced so-called voluntary assisted dying laws, they've opened a Pandora's box to consequences that we now need to deal with. And obviously the ACL would prefer that we'd shut down these laws, that we don't agree with them full stop. But we must deal with the very negative consequences of the laws.
And as Christian believers, and the local church may actually be something of a sanctuary, because the people in your local church are likely to be able to say, we're created in the image and likeness of God. We all have value. It's not our role to be taking any lives prematurely. And so the church here actually has this sort of sanctuary appearance. And maybe, I can't speak for every local church, but you might have your own thoughts on this, Rob. But local churches will see your value right up to your last breath. Whereas outside of the church, they're not seeing that value at all.
Yeah, the church has a massive role to play in this, and you're right, you've targeted it spot on, Neil. The church will become a magnet. As these issues increase, the many social issues that we're facing, churches can really man up in this situation, and I mean that in a very positive way. I love what Rick Warren said. He said that the local church is the only hope of the world, and I seriously believe that as a pastor of 30 years. I'm convinced that that's true. I'm convinced that we have a role to play. I'm convinced that the church can also advocate before government and that we can bring about the right outcomes. But we can't be silent. We just can't be silent, Neil.
And as an older person, you might be feeling as though you're vulnerable to coercion, and it might be a really valuable place to be part of a seniors group in a local church. You maybe never thought of the seniors group as being so valuable as the ones who may well be able to affirm your value as a citizen right up until your dying breath. Hey, let's talk puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. An independent review planned in the state of Queensland.
Yeah, this is well underway, and so it comes on the back of the Health Minister's pause or ban on puberty blockers, which is temporary. And so what's happened is that the Minister for Health has ordered this inquiry into what they call stage 1 and stage 2 hormone therapies. And so that applies to early puberty blockers for children as young as 12, and then the ongoing hormones that need to be applied, and I say, quote, need to be applied to older teens to maintain the progress of changing their hormones. And so the many, again, negative consequences that have come out of this have highlighted the need for an inquiry. Of course, this is topical again. Des Horton wrote an article in the Courier Mail this week that highlighted the plight of Gillian Spencer, the child psychiatrist. But we're very concerned about the ongoing effect of these hormones, Neil. We don't have enough data, and that's the whole problem, is that kids are getting into their early adulthood and then they're detransitioning. So there is a real problem here, and this inquiry is essential. And again, the ACL is a part of this, and I do believe that there are many experts that will be making submissions as well.
Hey, Rob, we're putting the boot into the Queensland government a little bit this morning, but is Queensland a little bit ahead of the pack when it comes to these hormones? Because an independent review, this came from an incident, didn't it, up North Queensland? How does all this come together that this inquiry is actually progressing?
That's correct. So it came out of a newspaper article, actually, that highlighted what was happening in Cairns, where kids were beginning transitioning without their parents' knowledge. And we're not talking small numbers, we're talking up to 100 that were targeted, and it goes beyond Cairns. It's a systemic problem. I suspect that Queensland is the canary in the coal mine, and we'll see these kinds of inquiries taking place elsewhere. We shouldn't be surprised at the outcomes of the findings. Dr. Cass and her review in the UK has already given us the heads up that there are problems in this space. These hormones are not natural, they're not good, and you don't deal with a mental health issue by medicating it. This is really, really bad medicine.
And there's a message, no doubt, in there for parents as well. This is getting to the point, isn't it, where do I place my child so that they will understand this biblical foundation that Christians hold to and that local churches by and large will hold to, that there are boys and girls, there are men and women. It is binary. There's not a crossover of the two. But in your local church, in a youth group, potentially, you're likely to find at least a biblical foundation there that's going to set out a truthful way of thinking about sex and gender. The local church, again, another potential there for being the champion here.
No, we're on a unity ticket there, absolutely. And again, plug into a local church, find a church that's got a healthy youth group. And again, parents, Neil, have got to be in charge of this. We have to encourage parents to parent their children. This is a lost art, and I would really encourage pastors to think about what we're doing to teach parents how to raise their children appropriately. We can do so much legislatively, and the ACL and others can advocate in Parliament for good laws, but ultimately it comes down to parents.
Wonderful wisdom, wonderful insight. Hey, another thing that's going on in the state of Queensland, I think everyone around the nation is going to be wanting to keep up to date with this, because the adult time for adult crime developments in the state of Queensland, you're helping Christians understand the dimensions of what's developing in your state. How does it all look from here?
Yeah, this is a developing issue, and so a very important one. I think this is more than just Queensland, Neil. We're going to see this more and more as people rightly, the normal people in the electorate are rightly targeting youth crime as being a real problem. We know this is true. The papers are full of it. There's always something topical of young people offending. And so the public in general have insisted that this change. The Queensland government has responded by introducing adult time for adult crimes. Other states are following. But the problem that we see here, and this has been well known for time, is that some of these children, many of these kids, have other issues that are not being dealt with. So there are underlying issues, mental issues and all sorts of issues that we're not dealing with, and it calls for a nuanced response. So it's good to have heavy crime, heavy penalties for these, but we've got to rehabilitate these young people, Neil.
When people are casting judgment on the Queensland government for having heavier penalties, the adults' time for adult crime, is there a sense in which those nuances are being neglected, do you think, by the Queensland government, or are they working with a whole lot of dimensions here so far as young people go?
I think what we're seeing is that the Queensland government is honouring a promise that they made at the election, and so they've taken a fairly broad-brushed approach to that, and they've had a couple of goes at it through legislation. But many of the people committing these crimes, the young kids, Neil, have learning difficulties. They've got mental issues. They've come from broken families. Many of them, 65% across the nation, in fact, are Indigenous. There's a real issue there that it is being neglected at this point. And 72% of these kids in Queensland particularly are on the autism spectrum. And so we've got a very complex problem that takes more than a binary approach. Time for adult crime. It's got to be more than that.
How are various states dealing with this? You mentioned that it's not just Queensland. There's a bunch of states that are now looking at how they can work with this. So you've got the Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania and the Northern Territory. They're looking at these things. What sort of things are they looking at to strengthen and toughen and at the same time, make allowances for some of these kids who are growing with all of these different disadvantages? What's happening here?
Look, I think most of the concerns are coming at this stage, Neil, from NGOs, from non-government organisations. And as time goes on, the governments, the state governments in particular, will be leaning, I think, on NGOs to give them the best advice. And so the ACL's trying to get on the front foot here. We've identified this as being a problem. I know there are other groups that are doing it. But yeah, look, I think the governments are really responding. They're responding quickly to an issue, but in the process of doing that, they're probably missing some of the finer nuances. And so we can be part of the solution there. Again, churches, Christians, people that are right-thinking people need to be engaged in this issue.
We can look at what the states are doing, but there's some things happening internationally. The Nordic countries, even New Zealand, doing a different approach here. Keeping an eye on what's happening internationally. I know you like to do this around a whole lot of issues, see what's working internationally, and sometimes that helps shape the sorts of dimensions that you're moving towards. But what's working in other nations? You got something briefly?
I don't have anything that's going to give us a direct answer on that. What I can say, broadly speaking, though, Neil, is that, yes, there are nations that are way ahead of us on this, and that's a good thing. That means that we hopefully don't have some of the serious issues that have been happening around the world, but we are definitely looking at agencies overseas that are ahead of the game. There's nothing new under the heavens. There's nothing new under the sun, and we can learn from people that have been there before, and so the ACL's committed to that. I know that there are other agencies that will be doing that, and we're going to be putting this up as an ongoing issue to governments. So it's important we do that. We can't reinvent the wheel, Neil.
Wonderful insights today, Rob Norman. I wish we had longer to talk. The time goes by so quickly. But Rob Norman is the ACL State Director for the state of Queensland. The Australian Christian Lobby website is where you can connect with Rob, and no doubt there'll be some insights for those Queensland listeners who might be following along the Queensland issues. But for all the other different states and territories and those issues that are national, you might want to check out the ACL website, acl.org.au. Just be mindful too, they've got an end of financial year appeal that's happening at the moment. You can get weekly e-news and you can follow them on social media. Follow AC Lobby. Rob Norman, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil. You're a champion.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.